I have been doing an exegetical commentary from the Greek text of the book of Romans. Romans is probably the most, I guess we could say, theological book in the whole Bible. And it's a beautiful book about the salvation that Jesus Christ has brought because of his righteousness that has been brought through the cross. And I'd like to pick up at 118 now and work through the end of chapter 1. We have seen the foundation where Paul wants to come to Rome. He wants to be there so he can share with them mutually his gift as an apostle, and they can help each other. And Paul wants them to know that he's not ashamed of the gospel at all, and he feels a debtorship. So he wants to go to Rome and share the good news as well. So I'm picking up at verse 18. He developed a theme. The gospel is the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it, the dikaiosune, the righteousness of God is being revealed, ek pisteos eis pistin, out of faith into faith. And then he quoted Habakkuk chapter 4, that the just shall live by faith, which establishes his theme in this great book of Romans. So I'm reading the Greek, translating it, and then we'll talk about section by section, verse by verse, or several verses at a time, giving like an exegetical running type commentary. It reads then verse 18, and from verse 18 to 26, let me put it this way. From verse 18 to the end of chapter 1, Paul is showing the Gentile world and how the Gentile world is guilty. And then in chapter 2, the Jewish world and how it is guilty. In other words, what Paul is really saying is everybody's guilty before God. And in chapter 3, he concludes, for all have sinned, come short of the glory of God. So he sets forth his theme in these first chapters, 118 to 320, of the universal guilt of all human beings, of all mankind, and the need for the justifying work of Christ. That's his, he's sort of like he's showing the x-ray, and then he gives the solution in Jesus Christ, like a doctor will say, look at this, something's wrong here, but then he has a solution. That's what Paul's doing. So we begin at verse 18. Apocalyptai gar orgethou ap uranu epipasan asebean kai adakian anthropon ton ten alethean in adikia katakonton, or katakonton. That is, for the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, of humans who are suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. And then verse 19. Diate ta genostan tu theu phaneron estin in autois. Ha theas gar autois ephanerosin. Ta gar ha orata autu apakatisos cosmu tois poemasin naumena katharatai hete idias autu dunamis theates eis ta enai autus anapalaketus. Notice, because that which is known of God is manifest among them, for God has manifested it to them. For the unseen things of him from the creation of the world, by the things made, being understood, are clearly perceived, even his eternal power and divinity, so they are inexcusable or without excuse. In these verses, Paul is continuing and what his theme, bringing the need for justification and the righteousness of God, and says that the wrath of God is being revealed. The Greek word apokalyptai can mean it's presently being revealed. That is, it's now being revealed. Or it can be a futuristic present, is about to be revealed. And I think he could be looking at possibly both ends. And in a sense, maybe both. But I think he is looking at the final revelation of the wrath of God. And by the way, it is not his quick temper that Paul's talking about, but it's his righteous, persistent wrath of judgment. It's being revealed. That is, it's about to be revealed from heaven upon all ungodliness, Paul says, and upon the unrighteousness of men, of humans, who are suppressing the truth in their wickedness. So he is looking at the Gentile world, as we said, as it is suppressing the truth. Paul says that which is known of God is manifest among them, for God has revealed it unto them. That is, his unseen things from the creation of the world are being clearly perceived. The word he uses in the Greek reflects this revealing. The knowledge of God is being very vividly, Paul is saying, and clearly perceived from the creation of the world, being understood by the things that are made. So the Gentiles, Paul says, are guilty because God has revealed the unseen things to them in creation. What is that? Namely, his eternal power and divinity. So they are without excuse. So when they look at creation, when they look at the stars, the moon, they must realize that a supreme creator has created this in infinite power. And by the way, they tell us the nearest galaxy is 2.5 million light years away, traveling at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. We zip past the moon in 2 seconds. Think about that. And even though they didn't have all that knowledge, they could see the greatness of God in the heavens, in what he's created. I understand the earth can fit into the sun. What is it? Over, I'm thinking, 1,000,000 times, I believe. Is that correct? About, I don't know the exact amount, but it's mind-boggling. Instead of bowing down, though, before him, the Gentiles do something different. And so Paul is saying that all humanity stands guilty because instead of recognizing his eternal power and divinity, they make idols and they do not worship God. Rather, they worship idols and not the true and living God. And so in verse 21, Paul drives this point home. He says, Diati genotes ton theon, uchos theon edoxasan, eucharistesan, al ematiothesan in tois dialogismois auton kai escatiste he asunitas auton cardia. That is, because knowing God in this, They did not glorify him as God or were thankful, but they were vain, became vain in their thoughts, and literally their foolish heart was darkened. Notice in verse 21 then, what Paul is saying is, knowing God, they did not glorify him as God, neither were they thankful to him, but became vain in their thoughts, and their foolish heart was darkened. In other words, their mind became darkened to that revelation. Interesting, knowing God and seeing it, they turn the other way, is what Paul's saying concerning the Gentile world and really all humankind. Then he moves on in verses 23, 22, and 23 to continue this theme. Notice, Faskantes enai saphoi emoratheson. Professing themselves to be wise, they became foolish. Kai elaksan tein daksan tu aftartu theu in hamoiomati ekenas thartu anthropu kai petenon kai tetrapadon kai herpeton. Notice, and they professing themselves to be wise, they became foolish, and they exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God into the likeness of the image of corruptible man, and of birds, and of four-footed beasts, and of creeping things. Notice here in verses 22 and 23, they profess themselves, Paul said, to be wise, and they exchange the glory of the incorruptible God into the likeness of the image of corruptible man, and of birds, and of four-footed beasts, four-footed animals, and creeping things. In other words, instead of worshiping the true and living God, who basically could be clearly seen in creation, Paul says they turned away and they began to worship the image of humankind in all of its corruptibility, including the images of birds and of four-footed beasts and creeping things, looking at all the things that had been worshiped through time in the Gentile world. They did the very thing that God said not to do in the Ten Commandments. Even though they did not have the Torah, they worshiped the creature instead of the creator. And that's why Paul says they are guilty. And so as we move from verse 24 to verse 30, Paul then gives further witness of the response of the Gentiles in serving the creature rather than the creator. So let's pick that up in verse 24 and following through 30. Dia paredo ken autus hathaas in tais epithumias ton cardion auton eis aka tharsian tu atimatsistai ta somata auton in autois. Hoitenes metelaxan tain aletheon tu theu into pseude kai esabastesan kai elatrusan te katise para tan katisanta has esten eulagetas estus ionas. Amen. Wherefore God gave them over unto the lust of their hearts, unto impurity, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God in the lie, and worshiped and served the creature who is above the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. And then Paul continues down to verse 30, down through verse 31. It reads, Dia tuta paredoken autus hathaas es pathe atamias, Kai tegar theleai auton, mete laxan, ten fusikain, gresin es ten para fusin. Ka moios tekai hoi arsenes afentes ten fusikain, gresin tes theleas, exe kauthesan in te arexin auton eis alethus arsenes in arsesin ten askemasunen katerga samenoi kai ten antemistian gen ede tes planes auton in autois apalam banitas kai kathos uk edakimasin tan thaan ekain in epignose paredoken autois hathaas es adakiman nun poien tame kathekanta pepleromenus pase adakia paneria pleonexia kakia mestos thanu phanu eridas dalu kaka e theas psithuristas katalalus theasturges hupristas hupere fanus alatsanas ephuretas kakos ganyusin apathes asunthetus astorgus analaemanas hoitenes ta dikaya kai dikaioma tu theu epignoten hate hoita toiauta prasantes axioi thanatu esin manan auta poiusin ala kai sunyuda kusin tois prasusin. Prasusin. Let me just translate that, beginning as to what Paul had written. For this reason, God gave them over to dishonorable passions. Notice their women exchange natural relations to that which was contrary to nature, and likewise their men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another. Men with men, working or committing shameless acts, receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. And since they did not see fit to retain God or to have God in their knowledge, God delivered them over unto, and then we have a whole list of words here, and I would like to go through each of these real quickly and talk about each one. Unto a disapproved mind, to do the things not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malignity of every sort, uh, full of envy, murder, strife, guile. They were whisperers, um, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, uh, without understanding, covenant breakers, heartless, ruthless, who knowing the decree of God or the judgment of God, uh, not only who knowing the decree that those who do these things deserve, uh, are worthy of death, not only do them, but they take pleasure with those who practice them. So as we look at sort of a commentary on this section, from verses 1, chapter 1, 24 to 30, Paul gives further witness of the response of the Gentiles then in serving the creature rather than the creator, in their unnatural sexual behavior, culminating then in a litany of areas of departure from God's will. Some of the things that are listed are all unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, envy, violence, strife, guile, gossips, slanderers, hating God, insolent, haughty, arrogant, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, disloyal, lacking human affection, and unmerciful. And as we look at some of these individual words just quickly, uh, I'm going to use the book that I appreciate very much, Linguistic Key to the Greek New Testament, by Cleon Rogers. Dr. Rogers was my professor in college, my last year of college. He was also my basketball coach. That was back in 1963. And I appreciate his work very, very much. As he defines each of these, let me just go through them, each one, looking at them. Being filled, notice he says, with all of these things, with envy, with murder, strife, dalas, deceit, ethea, malice. This is where one puts the worst construction upon everything. Psithuristes. This is looking at people who poison other people by whispering things into their ears, gossiping. And Rogers quotes Godet at this point. They are kata lalas. They slander, they speak down on others. They slander others. Thaas stuges. They hate God. They're haters of God. Hupristes means they're arrogant and insolent. The word has to do with cruelty mixed with pride. And there is a quote here: the proud insolence and contempt for others displays itself in cruelty. And this is a quote on page 351. Then huperefanas, proud. arrogant. They feel better than others. They feel self-sufficient and look down the pedestal, so to speak, on others. Then we have boastful, alatson. They're bragging, boastful. They make empty boasts and false promises. Uh, and then effuretes, they're inventors of evil. Think of all the evil that has been invented through time. And then they disobey their parents. Uh, Ganes apathes. They are faithless, covenant breakers. Asunthetas, faithless to an agreement. They don't follow through on an agreement. Asturgas, they are unloving, without tenderness, Paul is saying. And it's interesting. There is another quote from Godet here that defines this asturgas. It refers to the lack of feeling, of natural tenderness, as seen in a mother who exposes or kills her child, or a father who abandons his family, or children who neglect their aged parents. This is a quote from Godet, uh, and this is found on page 351 of the book Linguistic Key to the Greek New Testament. And then aneleemon, unmerciful, meaning they're without pity, who knowing the dikaioma, the judgment of God, who knowing it and not only uh, approve it, but they rejoice with those that do these things. And Paul in verse 32 then says, Paul says, those who do such things take pleasure in others who practice the same things with them. This is the condition of the human heart, Paul says, and the reason for the guilt of the Gentiles not having the written law deny the law that was written on their conscience. And so when we come through chapter 1, we see universal guilt. Everybody is under the judgment of God. And that's the x-ray that has been turned on. Everyone has spiritual cancer. But the good news is when we come later on in the book, there will be a cure. And that is what Christ has accomplished in justifying and acquitting anyone who is willing to come out of faith in a belief in Jesus and his justifying work. That's Paul's development. That is Paul's theme. And we'll see it develop then further in chapter 2, when he will then look at his Jewish brethren and say, you're guilty too, because even though you have the Torah, you don't live up to it, is what he'll say. So everybody is under God's judgment and in need of his healing, which comes in his justifying work, which will come through Jesus Christ.